Hey everyone, it's Terry with the Des Moines, Iowa User Group. And in our May session, I actually got to present the presentation that I did at Dreamforce last year. This group has seen pieces of it, but never in its final form. So this was an opportunity for me to share that with my own local friends. And so it was a lot of fun being able to do that. Also, if you are a user group leader, or if this presentation resonates with you and you would like me to present it to your user group, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to do presentations for other user groups. I have a lot of fun doing it, and it's fun to meet new people and make new friends.
But hi, Terry and I are your Des Moines user group leaders for the admin group. Here are some various contact things in our titles, and we're real fancy like that. Cool. Karen and Joseph are our nonprofit leaders. I did not see them on this call, but if you have interest in working with nonprofits, you should definitely connect with them. And then Jerome and Sulab are our developer leaders as well. So if you're interested in development, connect with those gentlemen. And we have some upcoming local events. So these are all things that are being hosted by the Des Moines user group. We have another lunch and learn coming up next month. And then our in-person meeting will be in July. And we'll be talking about Salesforce architecture. I should mention that our June presentation is not Terry or I presenting. So please show if you are not wanting to hear us talk, it won't be us. And then in August, we will be doing another flow session on platform events. And then coming up in Q4, I guess technically also the tail end of Q3, we'll have more flow lunch and learns, as well as a session on our in-person meeting. We'll be talking about DevOps for admins. And there is a lovely QR code on there if you want a quick link to go register for any of those. Although I don't think any of them are published yet, but they will be by the end of the day.
It won't be complete, but there'll at least be a placeholder for you.
Yes, so you can get those on your calendar. All right. And then just some upcoming events in general, a bunch of Dreamin' events. Most of these are put on by user groups in those areas. So they're a different experience than you might be used to with Dreamforce. So the ones in bold are probably the more popular ones amongst the Des Moines crew, with Midwest Dreamin' and Dreamforce and Witness Success, Witness being Women in Technology, if you are unfamiliar with the acronym. So those are all some things coming up. Again, QR code provided by Terry here if you need it. And those are all the announcements. So Terry is now going to talk to us about Flow.
Yeah, and if you live in the area and you don't go to Midwest Dreamin', shame on you. Midwest Dreamin' you ought to go to. It's fantastic, and it given that it's so close and the content is absolutely phenomenal. So I would love to see all of you at Midwest Dreamin' for sure, and it's not that expensive. So make that a priority if you could, if that can at all fit into your schedule. I would ask if on your Zoom meeting, if in the top right-hand corner, you'll see a little view option that allows you to set the view to gallery or to speaker view or to something like that. If you can, just make sure my screen is the one that is full. That's going to be the actual presentation screen. So everything you see, as long as I'm the main part of your screen, hopefully you'll see everything just fine. So with that, those of you who don't know who I am Terry Miller. I run a consulting firm here in town called Home Team Consulting, kind of sort of an independent consultant, but the team is growing. And I've got a couple other people that work with me now that are fantastic. I am a Salesforce MVP, honored to be in that position. It's a little bit amazing to me that even happens, but that's fantastic. I hold 16 certifications on the platform. You already know that I lead this user group, and it's a privilege to be able to work with all of you. I truly do mean that. I love being able to go out and share the amazing things that we have going on here in Des Moines. And I think we've got a fantastic Salesforce base here, and it's awesome to be a part of that. I do lead a lot of study groups. If you're looking to get your admin certifications or the advanced admin, we just did Sales Cloud Consultant as another study group that I just led. And the videos are all out on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/Terry'sTidbits. And do a lot of training, do a lot of blogging, not as much lately, but and vlogging. But you'll find that stuff available on my website or on the YouTube channel. Mentor to a lot of people. I love that process. It's just so much fun to be able to plug into other people and help them on their Salesforce journey. So that's fantastic. And my favorite on here is I am known to talk to stuffed animals. You'll find some evidence of that out on my YouTube channel as well. So Einstein, he's my favorite. He's my guy. So that's enough about me. Let me transition away from me into our actual topic today. And I don't know about you, but for me, well, transitions they can sometimes be a little bit difficult. They can sometimes cause a little bit of stress, maybe a little bit of anxiety, and maybe even a little bit of frustration. And I personally, I can get caught in the routine of doing what feels comfortable. And then it happens. It's that moment when what was is no more and what is now our new reality. And for a moment, I might feel a little bit lost, perhaps even a little bit frustrated. So let me give you an example. How many of you, and if you aren't on video, I'd love to see your faces. But how many of you, if you could raise your hand or the emotion icon or whatever they're called, have ever purchased a new car or at least a new to you car? Lots, I would guess most of us have had that experience. Do you remember the first time you got in that car at night and you had to turn on the lights and you were fumbling all over the dash trying to figure out where is that light switch so that I can drive safely down the road? Or perhaps it was the first time that you got in and the rain was coming down and you're trying to figure out, how do I turn on these windshield wipers? I recently have had that same experience. So I for years have driven a Lexus sedan, and I love my Lexus sedan because it was so comfortable. Now, you may not know about this. Some of you do. I love also woodworking. And the thing about woodworking is that sometimes you're required to carry large sheets of material in order to build things. The Lexus, it didn't do wood very well. And so I was needing to make this decision of transitioning away from the Lexus. And now I drive this little beast of a machine. And I think this thing is awesome, but it is entirely different. I now understand when you see pickups or trucks that are backed into parking spots, why they are backed into parking spots. It's because it's the easiest way to get that large machine into the confined space of a parking spot. Everything is different in the pickup. Now, I love this truck. I can do things with my truck I could never do with my Lexus. I can navigate to places that I could never have driven the Lexus to. I can carry things, obviously, that I could never carry in my Lexus. I can, even when I'm in my truck, be big enough to block the view of all those behind me. I can be that guy that is so annoying to be behind. Now, you might be thinking, well, Terry, that's a lovely story, but what's that have to do with Salesforce? And I would tell you it has a lot to do with Salesforce because we have been going through this same process as it relates to our automation tools within Salesforce. We have been very comfortable with Process Builder and even workflow roles, if you remember some of those old ones. But like with everything else, we are now transitioning over to a new technology And the new technology gives us so much more capability than what we had in our nice little comfortable process builder. And so we're looking at some concepts here today that I hope will help you on your journey as you're making this transition from process builder over into flow, and it's covering some of the basics that I'm hopeful that as we go through these might give you a few light bulb moments and help you make some sense as we start to talk about flow. Now, I do get the privilege of talking about flow and talking to users literally now around the globe. And I will often hear admins say things like, Terry, flow is hard. It's intimidating. I am not a developer, Terry, and this feels an awful lot like developer-y things. Well, if that's you, I hear you. And we're going to hopefully help bridge some of that gap today. So let me introduce our use case to you. And our use case is simply going to be this. We're working with our HR department, and our HR people have come to us and they said, hey, we've got this positions object in Salesforce, and we'd really like to be able to have a screen that would show us how many open positions do we have and how many filled positions do we have. And so we're going to build a screen flow to present this information. And I know a lot of you are good admins out there, and you're probably thinking, well, Terry, why not just build a dashboard, reports and dashboard? And Terry would say something like this to you, says, because you're in a flow session. We're learning flow today. We're not learning reports and dashboards. And a lot of things that I do when I train people, it may not make sense to use the technology, but it's a great example of how we can leverage it. So we're going to build this using a screen flow today. And the first concept as we jump into this that I want you to understand is simply that of resources and elements. Resources and elements are what make up our Salesforce flows. And some of this is kind of like learning a new language so that when we communicate with each other, we know what we're talking about as we work through flow. So this is really basic, but resources are things that we create and then use. You literally have to create it. And I'll show you this in just a second. Elements are things that are configured to do stuff for us. Resources are created and then used. Elements are configured to do stuff for us. So let's jump over to Salesforce. Like I said, this is going to be a screen flow. So we're going to jump in and create that. And when you come into your first flow, you're going to see this big, what I call white open space. It's called a canvas, and it can sometimes feel a little bit intimidating to us. But resources, they kind of tuck them away over here under this toolbox. And they literally do have a new button. So resources are created, then used. We have to create a resource by clicking on the new button. Elements are things that are configured, that we configure to do stuff for us. So if I click on the little plus sign, I will see a list of all of my available elements. Resources are created and used. Elements are configured to do stuff for us. Now, I want to introduce a new concept here for you. And I have a question for you. And those of you who have been in this user group for a while, you've heard me have this conversation before. So this won't be new to you. But how many of you have a dresser in your bedroom at home? Hands again, please. How many of you have a dresser in your bedroom at home? I'm going to guess all of you have a dresser in your bedroom at home. And how many of you then have drawers in that dresser at home? And again, I think that's probably all of us. I mean, it wouldn't be a dresser without drawers, right? Do you put stuff in those drawers? I'm going to guess you probably do. Well, I too have a dresser in my bedroom, and it does also have drawers in it. And I put stuff in my drawers, and one of those drawers is a socks drawer. And I have these lovely trailhead socks. They actually kind of blend in nicely with me today. But these socks, they go in the socks drawer. And I also have a pants drawer. Pants go in the pants drawer. Socks, they don't belong in the pants drawer. They go in the socks drawer, because that's what the socks drawer is for. It holds socks. Pants go in the pants drawer. Socks go in the socks drawer. I also have a shirts drawer, and shirts go in the shirts drawer. Pants in the pants drawer. Socks in the socks drawer. And the really cool thing about that socks drawer is that anytime I need these socks, all I have to do is go to that drawer and open it up, and there are my socks, right where I left them. Variables in Salesforce are simply drawers. We use variables to store things temporarily, and then anytime we need those items, we can go to the drawer and grab those out right where we put them. So a variable is a type of resource that we are going to create in our flow. So let's jump over and actually see a demo here of variables. So back to our canvas, we're going to create a new resource. And in our use case, we need to have two specific variables. One is going to hold the count of the number of open positions, and one's going to have a count of the number of filled positions. When I create my resource, I'm going to be asked, what type of resource do I want to create? If you're brand new to Flow, most of the time, you're probably creating a variable. And so I'm going to create a variable. And when I do that, it's going to ask me for a name. Socks go in the socks drawer, right? It's my socks drawer. The API name is simply the name of this particular variable. I'm going to give it a name of number, because it is going to be a number. And I'm going to just call it open positions. A good admin would always give things definitions. For the sake of time, I'm not going to describe this for you. But like my socks drawer, a variable has to have a certain data type related to it. And so socks in the socks drawer, pants in the pants drawer, shirts in the shirts drawer, data types for my variable also have a type that's associated with them. Now, I can create a text variable, and then I could store alphanumeric items in that particular drawer. I can create, in this case, a number, which is what we're going to do. I could create a date, and then I could store dates in this particular variable. If I try to take a number and store it into a date variable, I create chaos, and it doesn't work. It will not let you do that. So in our use case, again, it's going to be a number. And when I choose that data type, I get a few more options that's going to show up on my screen for me. And in this case, it says, how many decimal points do you want your number? In our situation, our use case, it's going to be 0. And then I also have the ability to define a default value. And so I'm going to go ahead and set my default value at 0. The last two items here on the screen are some that kind of confuse people frequently. The available for output and available for input. That simply means that if I need this variable to be available outside of this particular flow, then these guys come into relevance at that point. If I need to be able to, from another flow, send a number of open positions into this flow, then I would need to check the available for input. If I need to take my number of open positions and send it to another flow, then I need to make it available for output. If you're working within the same flow, you don't need either of those. And in our use case, We aren't receiving information in and we aren't sending it out. So we don't need to select those items. So we've got our first open position variable defined. We also need to create a second variable that will be our filled positions. So number filled positions. This is also a data type that's a number. 0 decimal points and our default value of 0. So with that, we have created now two variables that we will use within our flow to store the numbers that we're going to share for our HR department. Now, before we store values in these variables, we first need to query some data. And you might be like, whoa there, dear Terry, you just said the word query. Did you forget? I am not a developer. Yes, you're right. You're right. I did forget you're not a developer. But let me ask you this, admin. Are you able, if I were to come to you and say, hey, can you create a list view for me? I suspect all of you would raise your hand and you would say, yes, Terry, I can create a list view for you. That's no problem. Well, then I would suggest to you this, is that if you can create a list view for me, you will have no problem querying data from Salesforce using their get element. And so we're going to jump back over to our flow and we're going to add our new element in. And it's simply going to be clicking on the plus sign. And you could scroll down this list, but I'm just going to quickly find it by typing in the name get. And just like your list view, where you have to give it a name, you also have to give your get, your elements are also going to have a name. So in this case, this is going to simply be called get positions. And the object that we're going to be querying or getting information from is the positions object. Now, this position object, it has some fields in it. One of those fields is called a status field. And that status field will allow us to know if the position has been opened, filled, or closed. And we're going to come down here to the criteria, which is just like what you would see in your list view where you get a list of your fields. And I personally like typing in at least starting to type in the value of my field name because it filters my list of fields down. So it's just a little faster if you type in. You don't have to. You could literally scroll through the big list if you wanted to. But I like the idea that I can start to type and have that begin to filter for me. So I've got my field name. I've got my operator, which is simply, in this case, it's going to be an equals. And when I click into the value, I have my 4 pick list options that are available to me. And we're going to choose the open status. And then I can add additional criteria by clicking on the add condition. And again, this will be status as well, where the status equals filled. Now you'll notice by default, it says that this is an and statement. This is no different than what you would see when you create your list view. By default, it's an and then you go up to your condition requirements and you can change that around. You can either make it custom or you can simply switch them all to an or. So we're going to switch that to an or. So we're going to get data from position object where the status is either opened or it's filled. With that, I'm going to scroll down. One of the things you're going to discover as you work with Flow is Flow always will take things a bit deeper, at least one step further than what you might be used to. And one of those things that they do is they give us the ability to control the sort order. So if sort mattered to us in this particular query, we could change the sort order and it will list then the fields for us in the order in which we want to be able to sort. And now we come down to this next section. And before we go into the next section, I have a little bit of a confession for you. I grew up in a very strict religious home. And you might be thinking, well, Terry, how strict was your home? And Terry would say, well, it was so strict that playing cards were not allowed in our home. Now, we were allowed to play rook. If you're familiar with rook cards, that's most of you are probably younger enough. You probably don't even know what rook is. Those of you older, you might be familiar with that. I don't know why we could play with rook cards and not normal playing cards. I assume it was because playing cards were used for gambling, and gambling could lead to other things that were bad. And so we weren't allowed to have playing cards in our home. And so, lucky for you, I don't believe that there's anything inherently wrong with playing cards. And so I brought my cards with me. What I want you to think about here with the cards is simply this. A card in my deck here is going to represent a record in Salesforce. So I may have a king. That'll be one record inside of Salesforce. And in this case, I've got a 5. These are records in Salesforce. Kind of use your imagination there a little bit. Records. And then I've got my full set of cards here in the pile. This is what Salesforce Flow is going to refer to as a collection. A collection is simply more than one. In this case, if our cards are representing records in Salesforce, we have 2 individual records here, and I've got a large collection of records here in the deck. When we look back at our query and we look at this, how many records to store? That's the concept that we just are talking about, where it's just a single record. Or if I choose all records, it's going to create a collection for me. So in this case, if we're trying to count number of open positions and number of filled positions, bringing back one record isn't going to get us there. So we're going to choose all records, and then we're going to move down to this next section called how to store record data. If you are new to Salesforce, then I am going to suggest to you that you simply choose the first option, which is automatically store all fields. Salesforce does all of the heavy lifting for you. You don't have to think about it. You just select that option and you're good. The second option, for those of you who want to move into a little bit further or a little bit more advanced, you might want to choose fields and let Salesforce do the rest. And when you select that option, you'll be able to scroll down the page and you'll get to choose your fields. Now, why would you want to do that? I'm glad you asked. The reason you would do that is, let's say you're doing a query against an object that says maybe has 50, 100 fields on it, but you only need the name. Why in the world would you ever want to bring back all 100 fields when you just need one of those fields? When you do stuff like that, you're taking up computer resources. This just aren't necessary. Now, is your flow going to fall apart for it? No, not unless it's ridiculously complicated, and then come back to some of the other sessions and we'll show you how to fix that. But if you want your flow to be more efficient, you would simply bring back the record, the fields that you need by selecting the second option. Again, if you're brand new, please stick to the first one just so that until you get more comfortable with how it works. There's nothing wrong with walking or crawling before you walk. And so this is kind of your crawling stage, is that first option. Now, if you're a control freak, which is the group that I tend to fall into, I'm going to probably choose the third option. And the third option allows me to name my collection. And it also has the ability for me to choose which fields I want to bring back. So it gives me a lot of flexibility in the option of the third one. So if you're the control freak side and you really want to manage the whole thing, Option 3 gives you that ability. We do not need that today. We're going to start with the automatically store all fields. So again, if you're learning, if you're brand new, there is zero wrong with using that first option. But do grow up, do graduate beyond it, at least at some point when it makes sense to use one of the other options. Feel free to explore those. I'm going to click down, and now I've got my Get element on my screen. Now, how many of you are familiar with the game Slapjack? Slapjack is kind of a cool little game, and it's a card game as well. And since I've got my deck of cards with me, we're going to play a game of Slapjack. And the cool thing about the game of Slapjack is that in our use case, we're going to have 4 players, and they're all going to have their stack of cards. And what I like about this game is that when one player is going to turn their card face up in the middle, and the way this game works, if you're not familiar with it, is when that card becomes a jack, the first person of the 4 that slaps their hands on that deck of cards gets to collect all of those cards, and they go into their pile. The objective is to be the person who has all of the cards at the end of the game. You then get to be the winner. So first player is going to turn their card over. In this case, it's an 8. And if that's the jack, then that's what we slap. It's not. So player 2 comes in, and they're going to turn their card over. In this case, it's a queen. Also not a jack. But what's cool here is that the only card that matters in the game of Slapjack is the one that's face up. The 8 no longer matters. It's the queen that matters. And we're going to go around, and now the 5 matters. And hopefully we won't have to go around too long until we get a jack. But every time a card comes face up, that becomes the card that matters. And the one that was below it no longer counts. And we're going to go at this for a while, it looks like. Until we find a jack. I swear this deck does not have as many jacks as what it's supposed to, because it always seems to take longer to find that guy than what seems reasonable. And we're going to run out of cards before I get there. My goodness. I don't know that I've ever had it. There it is. There's our jack. So first player grabs that card, slaps the hand on it. They now get to keep all of those cards in their pile. And hopefully whoever is the one with all the cards at the end is the one that wins. Loops in Salesforce are simply a game of Slapjack. Loops in Salesforce are simply a game of Slapjack. And the reason for that is because the only card or the only record that matters is the one that's face up. And Salesforce will call that record current item in loop. Let's take a look at how that works inside of Salesforce. So I'm going to come back, and we're going to add a loop to our flow. And I'm going to give that a name. Since it is a loop, I'm going to start it off with the name loop. And we are looping through the get positions collection that we just queried. So the query that we just did is called get positions. It's right here. That's a collection. You cannot do a loop through a single record. It has to be multiple records. And so our get had all records. We're simply creating a loop to go through those records. Now, when I say done on that, you will start to see our graphic expands out again, and we've got this nice little circular appearance that's happening within on our canvas now. We'll be able to add things within that circle. So the first thing, as I'm thinking about the use case here that we need, is we're going to need to create a decision. We need to make a decision. The first card in our loop that becomes face up, its variable name is simply going to be current item in loop. And so I need to make a decision on that item that in essence says, which way do I want to go? Decisions in flow are very similar to the diamond shaped items where we have the true and the false in a process builder. process builder was limited to just true and false. One of the things I really like about the decision element in Flow, again, Flow always takes it a step further. It gives us the ability to have multiple outcomes. So I'm not limited to just a true path and a false path. I can have multiple paths with a decision element. Kind of think of it like a traffic cop if you want to. You pull up to an intersection and the cop tells you which way you need to go. That's your decisions in Salesforce. So we're going to add a decision. Sorry, I need to click on the right screen. We're going to add the decision and we're going to give it a label. This is going to simply be decision on status, because the field that we're going to evaluate is simply the status field. And the first status field that I care about is my current item in loop, is the status opened or filled? So we're going to say this one is going to be opened. And open will mean that when my current item in loop, it's my first card that's face up, when that status, I can spell correctly, when that status field equals open, we're going to go down a different path. So that is the first one. The other path that I might need is the filled position. So I'm going to give it a label of filled. I'm going to grab current item in loop, my card that's face up. I want the status field from that. Where it equals filled. And now I've got two different paths. I can go down an open path, I can go down a filled path, or I have this default outcome. And in our case, I'm just going to simply relabel that to skip. I like that word. It just kind of makes sense in our use case. And frequently, I like it better than default outcome. We're just not needing to do anything with that. Now, when I click done, you'll see that I have now multiple paths. No longer are you stuck to just a true path and a false path. You get the ability now to fully define those decisions and the direction in which you want things to go. Next, we have assignments is going to be what happens here. So assignments give your variables. Remember at the very beginning, we created two variables, an open position and a filled position number. Assignments give those variables value, or they give them meaning. I sometimes kind of think, a variable almost has a bit of an identity crisis, sort of, because we created it, but it really doesn't have any meaning yet until we store something in it. It's kind of like having your dresser drawer with nothing in it. It's not serving its purpose yet. So assignments give us the ability to add values to our variables. So let's first do that with our opened path. So we're in our loop. We have current item in loop. It's coming in and looking at that decision. And we're going to go down the open path and we're going to throw an assignment in here. And that assignment is simply going to be assign open positions. Now, there's really no magic to my naming convention. I just recommend that you have a naming convention and you stick to it consistently. You don't have to follow mine. If you like the way that I do it, I do have a blog post on the naming convention that I use. It's out on my website, but just have one and it will make your life a lot better and a lot easier when you go to maintain these flows. So in this case, I need to assign a value to the variable that we created. And that variable is let's get in the right field. That variable is going to be our number of open positions. Now, my operator in this case, I don't want to set it equal to 1. I want to add 1 to the value of that variable. So if that variable is a value of 0, which is what we had set as our default. When the card or the record comes through this particular assignment, we're going to add 0 plus 1. And that's going to now store the value of 1 inside of that variable. No longer will it be 0. So that's the first assignment. The next assignment, we have to do the same thing over here on the filled position. So we will call this one assign filled positions. Our variable is right here. We're going to add 1 and click done. Now, if it isn't one of those two values, it's going to then come down the skip path, and then it navigates all the way back around up to the top of our flow. And at that point, I'm going to go back to my cards here and just kind of help you out here with that. So we've got, this is our collection. And the first card is face up. In this case, it would be the 9. That 9 navigates through our flow, and it comes back up to the top of that flow to our collection, and it's discarded, and the next card is turned face up. The only card or the only record that matters when you're inside of a loop is the current item in loop. It's going to navigate through all of the cards, work their way through that circle of items, and every time it's a brand new current item in loop as it works through that record. And eventually you get to your last card. When you get to the last card, it will exit the loop, and you are then outside now of that flow. And from when we go outside of that flow in our use case, we will have both the total number of filled positions and we'll have the total number of open positions ready to go. So we're ready to build a screen now. And with screens, we could spend every session we do probably talking about screens. We're going to cover screens in a very, very basic way because there's just so much that we could do with them, because our screens is what adds it adds to our user experience. It brings it to life. And so let's actually come over, and you can see here where we talked about the loop. And when we got to the last card or the last item in that loop, we come down this after last path and we navigate down to our next little plus sign that we can add a value to. So I'm going to click on that plus sign. We're going to add a screen. And on this screen, we're going to give it a label of screen positions. Now, be careful when you're doing this, because I will do this by mistake almost all the time. As soon as I put that label in, I think I need to click the done button because I'm done with that label. That's going to close out your entire screen. So it's a little bit weird, and you'll catch yourself doing it. I do it all the time, and it's like, dang it, I've got to go back into my element, open it up, and continue to work on it. So just be aware of that. That's a little bit of a nuance that can be a little bit frustrating at times. We're going to add a text element into this particular screen. So the top is just simply the label of your screen. And then we've got this white space that's kind of in between the header and the footer of our screen. And in here, we are going to add a text element. And I've got all of these different components that are listed over here on the left side. And one of those components is going to be a text component that I can simply pick up and drag over to my screen. Now here I am able to give it a name. Everything's going to have a name when you're working with Salesforce. So this is simply going to be, I'm going to call it, let's see, what do I want to call that? It's going to be display build position count. And then I can put a default value in that as well. And I'm just kind of catching up on my notes here. We are going to set that default value to our variable or number of filled positions. So text value, there's our filled positions. I want to add another text component that will show our open positions. And I did do that funny. I'll have to go back and fix it. I put my API name in the label by mistake. So you see the API name listed here. I'll fix that here in just a second. So we're going to call this one our, let's see, would be open position count. That gives me by default an API name. I just don't like the defaults. So I'm going to call that display. And then I'm not a big fan of the underscores, so I typically kill them. You don't have to. That's just Terry being Terry. And then now let me fix this label. This is going to be our filled position count. And hopefully that looks a little bit cleaner there now. And then I forgot our default value of opened. Okay, now I could implement my screen flow as simple as that. Now, because we're admins and we like things to look nice, we probably want it to look a little bit better than just two fields kind of on top of each other. So let's play around with another component. And the component that I want to play with here is called a section. And I'm going to pull a section over to my screen flow. And with that, I get now the ability to choose how many columns do I want for this particular section. And I can go full width, or I can add a column. Sorry, I was having trouble finding where is this? I can add a column, and now I've got two columns, one side by side. And let's put our open position count in one, and let's put our filled position count in the other. And now my numbers are going to be side by side. Might look just a little bit nicer that way. And then I think I can simply say that we are done with this, where I'm happier with the way that looks. Now, I don't need a footer in this particular case if I'm going to just show it on a as a component, say on the home page or something like that. The screen automatically is going to fill in that information. There's no need to have a finish button or previous or pause. So I'm going to go configure my footer and simply take that off of the page. I also don't really need that header. So I'm going to click out of that. So now it's just a simple screen with data that shows those two values, and I can click done. And with that, I have created now a Salesforce flow that once as activated, a screen flow, that once it's activated, I can place that anywhere on a screen inside of Salesforce. It will run through that calculation automatically and show for HR the open and filled positions for them. And we have got 10 minutes left, so I want to stop at 10 with that. And you would normally save this and get it all done, but for the sake of time, I did want to stop and give you a chance to ask some questions. And we're not going to do filtered collections; that'd be another option. But I wanted to, for the sake of time, just give you the opportunity to ask some flow questions. And if there's anything that we can help you with, if you have questions on what I just demoed, if any of that is helpful to you, that would be, I'd love to hear your feedback on that. So we have a few questions. Okay, Craig, I see your name is the first one in the chat that I see. Feel free to unmute and ask your questions if you'd like. If you want to, if you're a little shy of asking live, you can certainly ask in the chat, and Clarissa and I will monitor that as well.
Hey, so my question is, in your thought process, when you started this, you created the variables. What was the criteria to say, okay, what are the criteria? What are the variables I'm going to need? What did you Like, like I would say, I'm walking into
Yeah.
Home Depot. I need this, this, and this before I start my project.
Right. Right.
Need a
Yeah.
screwdriver, need the hammer, and I might need a.
Yeah. So ideally, and you won't get this 100% right. Just I'll go back to my woodworking analogy. I have my design for what I'm building. I'm actually building a new wall for behind me that probably will be there next week, maybe. But I had my designs all figured out. But as I was building it, I found out that that didn't quite work the way I expected it to. And so I had to make some modifications. When you're building your flow, I highly recommend you go in with your plan. This is how I'm going to structure this flow. You can create a lot of your variables and those resources up front, and then use them as you go through your build. But you're likely going to find that things didn't quite go the way you expected it to, and you will have to create some additional variables, or you may have to delete some that you created because you didn't need them or they didn't work quite the way you're expecting. But go into your flows with a game plan, with what you're planning, with what you think you're going to end up with. You'll come out of it with a much better result.
And are those flows, those variables reusable in other flows?
Only if I check the box that says make them available in as an input or an output. But even then, that specific variable, all it's doing is it's passing its value into another flow. In your other flow, you're going to have to create a variable to receive it.
Okay, so like if I was doing something completely different, I'm not building out a toolkit, I'm actually creating a new variable, kind of starting each flow with its own variable, not pulling anything that I've used from the prior project.
Yeah, if you're building out a brand new flow, you're going to create new variables. Those variables, remember, they're temporary. They're there for temporary storage. Once you're out of the flow, they're gone.
Your flows your variables are completely unique to your flow, and 9 times out of 10 you're not going to need to check either box because there's going to be very specific things. Like most of the time you'll have I usually have a record ID input variable so that I can pass a record ID into another flow, so that I'll mark as an input variable. And you're going to be very specific with your output variables, and that's normally only going to be what action is your flow taking. And most of the time, your output variables are only going to be in auto-launched variables. You're not often going to use those in screen flows unless you're doing a very complex
subflow. Yeah. Yes. Anthony, I see you have a question. I wanted to make sure we got to yours as well.
Hey, Terry. I love the content. I really like how you broke down some of the elements into real life metaphors, like the slapjack and the loops. Do you have other metaphors for all the different flow spots? Because it makes it fast to learn if you can think of it outside of Salesforce lingo.
Yeah, that puts me on the spot. I'm not sure. I probably have used a dozen different ones for different purposes. I can't think of any at the moment what I've done, but I really do. Like you said, I really do like the concept of slapjack for loops, because loops normally, when I'm talking to new people to flow, loops are the things that confuse them the most, and understanding how that relates to that particular game is kind of it's something that's memorable, and the next time you go do a loop, you're going to think about the game slapjack. And so I can't think of any other ones off the top of my head where I've used different analogies like that.
I think of assignments like boxes most of the time. Like an assignment is a box that you're putting something into the box or taking. Well, I guess maybe that works better for variables. I don't know. It's been a while since I had to use a metaphor, but I know I've used an actual box.
Yeah. Alyssa?
I was just kind of wondering, and this might be a really, really basic question, but how do you decide which kind of flow to use? So screen flow, easy, you're trying to show it to somebody. I've got, and this is probably something so simple, but I've got if my cases are open over 8 hours, then I want you to send me an email to tell me that everyone is naughty. So like all that timing stuff, it's not a record.
Yeah.
Is it a record? Is it a scheduled? I don't know.
Yeah. So it's an excellent question. And if you're brand new to flow, I will always tell people start with record trigger flows. You don't have screens. It's just when you save a record, if it meets a certain criteria, record trigger flows are your easiest entry point into learning flows. And everything you learn in a record trigger flow can apply to all of the others. So record trigger flows, you hit the save button. As long as the conditions match the conditions on your flow, then it will run that record trigger flow.
Okay.
Screen flows they're sort of the pieces that you put within a screen flow are very similar to what you would have with an auto launch flow. The difference is that you're scheduling this screen flow. I'm sorry, the scheduled flow has a specific time of day in which it's going to run.
Okay.
So the schedule is very clear in that regard. It's going to run on a schedule. Nothing other. Okay. It's triggered based off of time.
Okay.
Auto launch flows. The only way an auto launch flow is going to run. I shouldn't say only because it's not going to be 100% true, but primarily the way that an auto launch flow is going to run is if you run it or kick it off from another flow.
Okay.
Platform event flows, we're going to talk about those in a couple of weeks. This is a really cool concept of where you have some event that happened inside of your flow, inside of your Salesforce org. And you've got what we call a listener that is listening for when that event happens, it's going to then act based off of that. Sometimes if you're a developer type mind, it's what they would call the publisher subscribe model. Something happens and whoever's listening will then go do something when that occurs. Orchestration is a much broader concept where you're taking multiple flows and you're kind of building a multi-step process. So hopefully that kind of helps real quick. And I see that we're right at the end of our time as well. If you have other questions, I'd be happy to answer those. If you want to put those in the chat, I can certainly follow up with those as well. And with that is it for today. So hopefully that was helpful. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you, Carissa, for your help and support as well. You're awesome. And we will see you hopefully next month. So thanks again. If this was helpful, it will be out on YouTube probably in the next week or so. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.